Salmon are well known to be an iconic species in coastal British Columbia, and they're a keystone species in the ecosystem.
Back in the day, we were all concentrating on catching and harvesting fish. The idea of even the need to put them back seemed silly to an awful lot of people.
For a community like Stewart Island, it's the lifeblood of that community. The resorts, the lodges, the guides, everybody depends on healthy salmon populations. Over 30 years ago, the Stewart Island community came together and formed the Gillard Pass Fisheries Association to try to improve things for salmon in the area.
Really, the society would not even be possible, wouldn't even have ever happened if it wasn't for this remarkable guy, unlikely character, if you will, George Stephenson. If he'd not, number one, had this idea that nobody else did, number two, kept on trying and trying and trying. He managed to get the ear of a few key people, and one name that just comes to me naturally that I think made a really big difference, of course, is Dave Ritchie. He decided he'd have a listen to George and see what he was trying to do, and Dave got on board, and we started to see movement on behalf of interest and therefore funds and the ability to get things done and get salmon enhancement actually going.
We started here at Stewart Island in the early 80s with the Gillard Pass Salmon Enhancement Auction on the tennis court at the Ritchie's barge, and organized by Scott Thompson, and we instantly had community buy-in. It was the biggest event that this area had ever had, and super supported. People spent money and really bought into the whole idea of a hatchery. In the past, we've had up to 450 people, and boaters have heard about this event from different marinas and have continued to come back year after year.
The board, back about 10 or more years ago, decided that they really needed to set a clear goal for the Phillips River Chinook, as that was where the group had been working for a number of years, and the goal was to rebuild the population to a healthy and self-sustaining level. And to do that, they decided they needed to bring in best practices at the hatchery. We needed really good data so we could understand what was happening with the population in the wild. And the hatchery itself, after assessing it, really needed some rebuild. So there was some major investments at that time. Gillard Pass Fisheries has been working with Pacificus Biological for a number of years now. At the start, we sat down and we clearly identified what our information needs were and developed a suite of programs to achieve that.
Since 2009, Gillard Pass has conducted an intensive mark recapture on the Phillips River system, providing us great quality information in regards to the status of that population and the escapement to the system. Gillard Pass has been involved in juvenile monitoring of the production coming out of Phillips River, utilizing rotary screw traps and a variety of other methods to evaluate the run timing, stock structure of the Phillips River Chinook. The rotary screw trap is used to capture juvenile salmon as they out-migrate to the ocean from the freshwater system.
For the juvenile program, we had a lot of different challenges. It started out kind of late February, early March. We had snow on the ground still. Accessing these traps was a huge ordeal. In that system, it gets actually fairly flashy for such a huge system. And we were having some difficulties with freshet and being able to plan for it. And it did end our program a little sooner than we'd hoped for.
Operating a hatchery program on a remote boat access only watershed has been really difficult, but we've managed to do it successfully thanks to really great volunteer support. On our days when we do a big seine up on the Phillips River to get broodstock and to get fish as part of our stock assessment work, sometimes we need upwards of 15 volunteers.
This is cool. And this is amazing work and stuff that no one has ever seen before in their lives, and they keep coming back and learning more each year and just getting really engaged and learning something completely outside of what's normal for them would be relatively normal for us.
Gillard Pass Fishing Association has been instrumental in collecting high-quality data associated with the Phillips River. This data has been extremely valuable in our ability to understand the status of that population and the other populations it represents on the mainland.
Later on in the fall, as the fish become ripe, we bring other groups, smaller groups of volunteers in to help do egg takes. Once the eggs and the milk have been taken, they transport them back to the hatchery on Sonora Island, and that's where they're incubated and reared in our facility there. And then in the spring, they all get a helicopter ride back to the Phillips, so it's quite a journey for those fish. The fact that we've been able to deliver these programs despite all kinds of obstacles, landslides, floods, COVID, we've really developed a reputation as a reliable group. And because of that, we now have a long-term funding relationship with DFO. They highly value our data. It's also helped tremendously in relationships with First Nations. We actually operate in the Phillips watershed, which is the traditional territories of the Quaker First Nation, and we have a partnership agreement with them. An example of one of the other things that Gillard Pass has done is we conducted a 5-year trial of doing yearling Chinook, so raising them for an extra year in a hatchery. We had really good results, but the most interesting thing was the data that we got from it has been used by the Pacific Salmon Foundation and DFO in joint reviews of alternative hatchery approaches that might improve the outcomes for hatcheries up and down the coast. So of course what many people really are interested in is are there more fish? And the answer to that is yes. Back in the early 2000s, there was only a few hundred Chinook returning to the Phillips River. Last year in 2020, there was 3,500 adult Chinook came back to the Phillips River, and over half of those were wild fish that had spawned naturally in the Phillips River. People ask why Gillard Pass has paused the Chinook hatchery program, and it's because we feel that the Phillips Chinook have rebuilt. They're at a healthy level, and it appears to be self-sustaining.
To take a jewel like the Phillips River system and take it from a suffering little river system that could hardly reproduce its own salmon, you have to have an end game. And if there is no end game, then you're not really accomplishing much of anything, in my opinion. You have to be able to let it go and let it do its own thing. And then maybe go start another one somewhere or get involved in another program, but not just keep, and you just keep dumping fish and dumping fish and never stop dumping fish and forgetting why you were doing it in the first place.
Of course, we need to keep monitoring it. We want to ensure that it's going to sustain itself over time. And if it looks like it's declining again, then we would probably give it a helping hand.
So one of the biggest issues in the mainland inlets is the data deficiency we have in a lot of the systems. In 2021, DFO and Gillard Pass worked collaboratively to collect genetic baseline information from the Chinook populations in both the Southgate and Amathko rivers. One of the biggest issues we saw in 2021 was the slide that occurred in Southgate, which definitely impacted the spawning habitat of some of the salmon within that system. It's important that we continue to monitor those systems, and I think working with groups such as Gillard Pass, who are very knowledgeable in the area, along with other groups such as local First Nations and other community groups, it's important to continue to collect that information.
Now here we are in 2021, and we have complete community buy-in. They recognize the importance and the benefit to the whole community.
Gillard Pass Fisheries has been really successful in rebuilding Phillips River Chinook, and that's only possible because of the passion and the tremendous support from the Stewart Island community.
Again, I keep mentioning the word community, but it really is about community. That is the thing that draws and joins us together. In spite of all the doom and gloom that we hear, every day about the plight of salmon and other creatures in the natural environment, just shows that a group of people, if they're dedicated and persevere, that they can really make a difference. It's this passion and support for wild salmon that's going to sustain them long into the future.